In this video, I'm going to show how you can implement payments into a services marketplace like a Fiverr, like an Upwork, using Stripe Connect in Bubble. So if we search for a particular service like app development or Bubble app development, we're going to have the option to hire this freelancer. And you can see here we can put in some details. And let's say we hire them for $400. We're then going to be brought to the Stripe payment page, which we've actually embedded within our Bubble application. I'm going to fill out these details quickly. And once a payment is made, it's not going to leave the customer's account straight away. If we look at our Stripe dashboard, you can see the latest transaction here is uncaptured. We're actually going to wait until the freelancer accepts the job before the funds leave the customer's card and actually go into Stripe. So I'm going to log in as a freelancer and just accept that job just to show you what I mean. So once we click accept job, you can see a workflow is running in the background there. And at this stage, we should see this change from uncaptured to succeeded. And if we look at how this $400 has been split, we are building a marketplace. So we want to split this $400 between our platform and between the freelancer. And if we go to the collected fees section of our Stripe dashboard, we'll see that $80 or 20% of the transaction has gone to our platform as a platform fee, with the remainder going to the freelancer's Stripe account. We'll then finally go through how you can actually allow the freelancer to get access to their cut of it only after they deliver the service. So we're not actually going to release the funds until they successfully submit their work. To start off, I just want to quickly go through the topics that I'm going to cover in this video. We're going to start off by connecting Stripe Connect to Bubble. Stripe Connect is a leading solution for marketplace payments, and a lot of the marketplace apps you will have heard of will actually be using Stripe Connect. So I'm going to show you how you can integrate that with your Bubble app. We're then going to go and look at our database and how we might structure this in order to process marketplace payments. We're going to talk about onboarding merchants, and throughout this video, when I refer to merchants, what I basically mean is the people who are selling services on your platform. We're then going to get into the good stuff of actually splitting payments between the platform and the seller. So let's say you're running a services marketplace like Fiverr and you want to take 20% of every transaction that goes through on your platform. I'm going to show you how you can do that with Stripe Connect. We're going to look at a bit more of an advanced payment flow where we're putting a hold on the payment until the work that the freelancer is doing is accepted, so the money doesn't actually leave the customer's account. And then finally, the seller or the merchant isn't actually going to have access to the funds until the job is complete. So much like if you're using Fiverr or Upwork, the person who's delivering the service doesn't actually get the funds until the customer has said that, yeah, that job is complete and I'm happy to release the funds. Okay, so I'm in my Stripe dashboard. I'm using an old Stripe account I have called Qualified, and I'm in test mode. Now, for the purposes of this video, I've assumed you've already registered for your own account, and I'm also not going to go into too many details on how you actually activate Stripe Connect because there's plenty of other videos out there, and I just want to focus on how to implement the services marketplace payment flow. But just as a quick overview, what you'll need to do is once you've successfully registered for a Stripe account, go to Connect, go to the overview, and because I've already set my Stripe Connect up, I don't have the option to get started. But if you do not already have Stripe Connect up and running, there's going to be a few steps here you're going to need to fill out. Now, one more tip I'll just give is that I really recommend setting your company's icon and brand settings because it's going to make it so much easier when we're actually onboarding merchants in a bit. So just as you're setting up your Stripe Connect, I recommend going to settings, going into Connect, clicking on the onboarding interface, and you can see here if we go back into live mode, I'm going to be able to customize my branding, put in my icon, put on my brand colors, and again, you will actually get errors if you don't set these before you start onboarding merchants. So just as you're setting up, I recommend doing it. Okay, let's assume you now have Stripe Connect set up, you registered for it, you have set your branding. The next thing we need to do is actually connect Stripe Connect to our Bubble app. And for the rest of this video, we're going to be using the Stripe Connect Marketplace. This is a Cranford Tech plugin. It is a paid plugin, and you can find it by going to the Add Plugins section of your editor under Plugins here, and then searching for Stripe Connect Marketplace. Now, once you have it installed, you do need to put in some API keys just so that it's connected to your Stripe account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my Stripe account. I'm going to go to the developers. I'm going to go to API keys. And you'll see here I have two sets of keys. I have my publishable key and I have my secret key. Now, for the publishable key, I'm going to copy that first. It's pretty straightforward. All I need to do is put it into the publishable key dev. And then for the other two, I'm going to be using the secret key. But I'm going to be using two slight variations on the secret key. First of all, I'm just going to copy the secret key as it is, go back, and I'm going to paste that into Stripe secret key. And then for API key dev, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the word bearer space, and then I'm going to paste in my secret key again. It's just important to have that bearer in front of it. Now, for the rest of this video, we're going to be in test mode. We're not going to be dealing with real money. But when it comes to the time when you actually want to deploy your app to production, you're going to need to also fill out these three fields here, and you fill it out exactly the same. What you do is just instead of being in test mode on your Stripe dashboard, you would toggle this off, then you would grab the keys in the same way, and you would put them in here. The Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin actually comes with some pretty detailed documentation, and it explains all this if you want to have another look as you get closer to the time of when you actually want to deploy your app. Okay, let's take a look at our checklist. So we've gone through activating Stripe Connect, installing the plugin, adding our icon and branding, and then configuring our API keys. So next we want to move on to our database overview, and I specifically want to hone in on three data types here: user, service, and transaction. Because if we look at our demo app that we're going to be using for the rest of this video, you can see here I have a number of different data types, even outside of what I just mentioned there. But these three, which is user, transaction, and service, they're really going to be key for the kind of payment flow. There's other things here like conversation and message that are used for the freelancers and the customers to send messages to each other, and then reviews to leave ratings, but they're not really crucial for the purposes of this video. Maybe starting off with user, you can see here we have a number of fields, and the first one I want to highlight is just this charges enabled field. This is a yes no field, and we're going to use this to check whether our merchants, our sellers, have successfully registered a Stripe account or not. When they have successfully registered a Stripe account, we're going to set this field to yes, and then and only then are they going to be able to list services for sale on their platform. Stripe customer ID, not really a mandatory field, but it's for the customers, and this is going to be used if they want to reuse their payment details. We're not going to go into detail on that, but just to let you know why that's there. Name, pretty self-explanatory, the name of the customer or the seller. Reviews, not going to touch on that, but it can be useful if you want to leave reviews for freelancers. Profile picture rating, again, not going to touch on that. Role, so this is, probably an important one. Every user in this application is going to be either a customer or a freelancer. And where I'm getting this is if I went to my option sets, you'll see here I've defined a few option sets, and only really the role and the job status ones are probably relevant for us today. But under role, you can see I have customer and I have freelancer. So every user that signs up for my application is going to be either a customer or a freelancer. We also have the seller account ID, and you can see here I have Stripe in brackets afterwards, and this is going to represent the account ID in Stripe for every freelancer on your platform who is selling services. And just to give you a sense of where this comes from, if we go to connect and we look at all the connected accounts, and I already have quite a few because I've been using this test account for quite a while, but if we look at this user here, you'll see here that they have a account ID, which we can get by copying this, or we can actually search for account, and this is it down here. So it's going to be slightly different, obviously, depending on which seller you're referencing, but this is the basic structure: ACCT dash and then a string of random characters. Services. So every freelancer on our platform is going to have a list of services that they have listed for sale, and that's where we're capturing that. Transaction is really going to be the core of the payment flow, and there's a couple of fields here. We could probably put in a bit more, but I recommend these as the bare minimum for processing transactions in your app. The first is the amount, and you can see here importantly in brackets I have cents, and the reason I have cents is because Stripe always deals with numbers in the lowest denomination of the currency you're using. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be assuming you're using US dollars, in which case the lowest denomination is cents. Now this might be different if you're using like Korean won or some other currency, but just for the purpose of this video, we're sticking with cents. Checkout session ID is going to represent the ID of the checkout session, which is where a user makes a payment via Stripe, and we're going to use that to pull in some other information. Payment intent ID will come onto, it's quite important. Then seller ID, again, that's actually the same as what we have on the user down here. Seller account ID. In fact, we probably don't need to have this referenced twice. We're only going to use one of them in the video, but it's essentially the same thing. And then status, that's just going to reference the status of the transaction. Finally, service. So service is essentially going to be whatever product the seller is selling on your marketplace. And we just take a look. We have one open here, and you can see here this user, Lewis Bridge, he's selling app development. That's his service. But if we go to our search page, you'll see that we also have a bunch of other services like logo design, branding consultation, web design. That's what their service is. Category is going to be what category the service fits into. Description is going to be description of the service. Featured is just a yes no field I'm using to decide whether or not we showcase this service on the homepage. The freelancer is the user who is selling the service. The image is going to be, this image here is associated with it. And then name and price per hour, just to give a gauge of how much the service is going to cost. So we do have some other data types, like I mentioned, and probably should look at job just quite quickly. You can see here we have a number of different fields, and we're actually linking to the transaction, but I'm going to come back to that in a bit. Okay, moving on to the next section, which is onboarding merchants. And again, merchants are effectively the sellers, the people who are selling services on your platform. So we want our sellers to register a Stripe Express account. You can register a bunch of different Stripe accounts. You can use standard, custom, or Express. For a lot of marketplaces, Express is the easiest one to get up and running, and it's what we're going to be using in this video. So just give you a sense of how this is going to work. Let's go back to our index page in our demo app here. Let's preview it. And you can see here, I'm actually logged in already, but if I log out, you can see here we have the option to register for an account. And when we register for an account, we can either register as a customer or as a freelancer. And if we register as a freelancer, we're first going to be brought to this page, and I'm just going to sign the user up now. One thing to note is that the demo app I'm using in this video is actually available as a free template on the Bubble Marketplace. And what's really useful is it actually comes with a lot of the payment flows built into it. So if you're not sure about anything I'm covering in this video, you can simply get this template for free and just check out the payment flows. And they're then going to be brought to this freelancer dashboard. And you can see here straight away they're brought to the profile page. And in fact, I'm just going to blow the profile picture quickly. And you can see on the right here we have your profile is not active. You'll need to register for a Stripe account before you can list services for sale on the marketplace. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically using a conditional statement so that if this user's charge is enabled, if we go into app data, we can see it. This is our latest user. And you can see here, really importantly, charges enabled is no. This means the user hasn't registered for a Stripe account that's valid yet. And this means they're not able to list services on the marketplace because we don't want people to be able to list services unless they have successfully registered a Stripe account. This conditional statement is also in effect on the services page. So this is where they're actually going to list their services once they've registered. But as of now, you can see if they add a new service, you're getting this message saying you need to register for a Stripe account first. So what we're going to do is we're going to build out the workflow associated with this register button. I'm going to go back to my page, and it's under this views profile. And you can see here we have this register button, and there's nothing associated with it at the moment. And we're going to add 4 actions here. The first one we're going to do is we're going to go to Stripe Connect, and we're going to create an Express account. Now you are going to need to provide a country, and it must be a 2-digit country code. You can see a full list of country codes at this link. I'm going to stick to the US for now. For the email, I'm simply going to use the current user's email. Payout interval. This is actually really important. I'm going to set it to manual and I'm going to explain why later, but just remember that we're setting the payout interval to be manual. And if we're setting payout interval to be manual, these two fields here aren't relevant. There's some more advanced options here as well that I'm not going to go into now because they're not necessary for our video here. Okay, we have created an Express account. Next we want to do is we want to make changes to the current user. And we want to set their seller account ID to be equal to the result of step 1, their Stripe account ID. So we're creating the Stripe account here, and then we're adding it to the current user there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to plugins again. We're going to go to Stripe Connect, create onboarding link, and you can see here we have a number of different fields to fill out. The first one is account, and again this is the Stripe account ID of the seller we're onboarding. So this is really easy to get. We can go to result of step 1, Stripe account ID. The refresh URL is where the user is going to be redirected to if they have used a link that's expired or something else didn't go right. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to put in this URL, which is going to send them back to whatever page they were on. Then at the end of it, I'm just going to add in refresh equals true. And you can see there I have a question mark to signify it's a URL parameter. This can just be useful if you're looking to pull in information based on certain things happening. I'm going to do the same thing for the return URL. This is where they're going to be sent if they successfully complete their Stripe onboarding. But I'm just going to put in return equals true on this one. And again, I'm going to leave the onboarding flow as the upfront onboarding. You can read more about that by clicking on this documentation button, but not relevant now. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to navigation. I'm going to go to open an external website, and we're going to open up the result of step 3, and its URL is coming in there automatically. So we now should be able to have our user Alex here register for a Stripe account. So I'm going to click on this button. And we're brought to this Stripe onboarding portal. And this is why it was really important to put in our branding and icon earlier, because if we don't do that, then it's not going to work. It's necessary for whatever reason for Stripe to create the onboarding portal. Now, depending on what country your user is signing up for an account for, US in this case, this is going to look a bit different. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the Stripe interface itself because the details are always going to be slightly different depending on your region, depending on your business. So I'm quickly going to fast forward through this, but needless to say, you need to fill out the information accurately and provide it all to Stripe. Okay, so I've filled out all of the details, and if I click on agree and submit now, I should be redirected to my dashboard. Okay, so you can see now that we're back on our dashboard. We didn't actually get that return equals true at the end of the URL, and the reason for that is because I had debug mode on, and that just confuses Stripe. So you see I did have debug mode equals true in the page name when I was leaving, and that can confuse Stripe sometimes. But you'll see now that we do have our green dot here to say our profile is active. And if we look at our bubble database, you'll see that our user alexalbantest@gmail.com charges enabled are now yes. And the reason for that is when the page is loaded, you'll see here there's a workflow for check for Stripe account. And this is only going to run when the current user seller account ID is not empty. So you might remember we created a Stripe account ID, we added into the user, which is here. That means whenever this page loaded, we ran this workflow. And what we did is for charges enabled, we use this call here. I might actually recreate it. So what you're going to do is you're going to say charges enabled, and then we're going to go to get data from an external API. The API provider is going to be Stripe Connect with 3 account details. The account ID is going to be the current user's seller account ID. And we're going to go for charges enabled, which is a yes, no field. So let me just manually change that user's charges enabled back to no. And let's refresh our page. And what I might do is actually refresh it, you'll see it's not active there, but then it turned green. And it turned green because we look at this here, once we refresh, you'll see there it's gone to yes. That's because we are running this workflow and we are updating the user's charges enabled to yes. This means that he can now list services and basically begin to sell stuff on the marketplace. Maybe one more thing just to look at here is take a look at this seller's account in Stripe itself. So if we go to Stripe, and you can see here I'm actually going to sign in again because Stripe now thinks that I'm signed in as this particular user, Alex Albon Test. So I'm just going to sign into my original platform account. Okay, back in our Stripe platform account, and if we go to connected accounts, we should see the most recent one is for Alex Albon. You can see it's complete. You can see it's a US account. And if we click on this, we're going to see that payments are enabled. Payouts are manual, which we know we set. If we go down here, we should see his account ID, which ends in XV. And that should also be the account ID we're seeing in the database, which it is. So this is the seller's account in Stripe itself. We've covered all these, but there's maybe two more things that are useful. And number one is just allowing the user to access their Stripe Express dashboard. So you can see here, now that our test user has registered for an account, we no longer have the register button. Instead, we have this access dashboard button. And again, this is just being controlled via conditionals, where this group here, it's only shown when charges enabled is no. And then this one here is only shown when charges enabled is yes. And just to give you a sense of what's going on with this workflow here, nothing at the moment. What we're actually going to do is we're going to allow the user to access a Stripe Express dashboard. It's a really nice Stripe interface where they can see the sales they've made. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to go to Stripe Connect, create Express dashboard link. And what this is going to be the current user's seller account ID. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to navigation, open an external website, and it's going to be a result of step one, its URL. So let's try out that workflow now. Let's refresh our app and let's click on Access Dashboard. And you can see now we're being brought to this connect.stripe.com address, and it says Stripe Express Dashboard. I'm just going to use the test code again because we're in test mode. Now this is going to appear quite blank at this stage because we obviously haven't processed any sales through the seller just yet. But you can see here, this is where they're going to get a nice view of all their earnings over the past year, 7 days, whatever it may be, see their balance. So just a useful thing to give your sellers access to. I think that's kind of everything we needed to cover in onboarding merchants. We only let them sell services after they registered for an account. Again, we use conditional for that. We registered for Stripe Express accounts. We set the payout schedule. We just kind of mentioned that, but it is going to be quite important later on. And then we also checked if charges were enabled. So next is we're getting on to the good stuff, which is actually splitting a payment between this platform and the merchant. Okay, let's move on to actually processing payments and then letting your platform take a percentage of each sale. So I'm back on the homepage of my freelance marketplace, and if I just search all of the services for sale, there is a new one here, which is by Alex Albon, who's added this in the background, and it's for bubble app development at 80 euros an hour. And I actually meant to do everything in dollars, so let me just change that quickly. Okay, now we're on dollars, and if we click on this, you'll see here we have the option to either message Alex or to hire him. Now, it's saying you need to log in as a customer if you want to message him, which makes total sense. So I'm just going to log out as Alex and then log in the background as a customer. You can see here I have one customer data type or role in my database. I'm just going to log in as that particular user. Go back to Alex's bubble app development, and you can see here I can either message them, which opens up this messaging kind of thing in their dashboard. They can message the freelancer and discuss rates, and then after they finish with that, they can hire them. So this is where we're going to start building out the flow that's actually going to process the payment and then split it. So let's just call this job bubble app development, Alex's rate is $80 an hour, so let's just assume 10 hours of work for $800, and we're just going to call this marketplace app. Okay, what happens when we click this submit proposal button? Let's go and find that in our application, and that's going to be under service. That's where I'm listing all the services. And if we click on this, edit workflow, okay, this is actually already built out at the moment, but I'm going to recreate it and talk you through it. So let's just delete all of these. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new thing, and the new thing is going to be a transaction. And we're not going to touch it just yet because we don't really have much information on it just yet, but that is going to be the first thing we do. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a checkout session by using the Stripe Connect create checkout session action. And this is how we basically create a Stripe hosted payment form where we can process a transaction using all these parameters here. Now, it looks like there's a lot. Not all of these are obligatory. Not all of them are necessary for what we're doing here. So I'm just going to talk you through what's necessary for us here today. So what I'm going to do is for success URL, I'm going to put in website home URL, and then I'm going to navigate down to the dashboard page. And within the dashboard, I actually have this section. If I go here, and it's called jobs, and this is like a list of all the jobs. So I'm going to navigate them to just dashboard, and this is going to show up. And then at the end, we're going to put in success equals true. And again, note the question mark there to signify that it's a page URL parameter. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the cancel URL, but I'm going to paste in instead of success equal true, I'm going to put in cancel equals true. And then the Stripe account ID, if we look at the documentation here, this is the Stripe account ID of the connected account, i.e. the person selling the product service. And because it's Alex Albon test@gmail.com selling this service, we're going to need to get his Stripe account ID, which is this one here. So let's get the Stripe account ID by saying it's going to be equal to the current page's service, freelancers, seller account ID. So in our database, we have our service. Each service has a freelancer, and then each freelancer, who is a user essentially, has a seller account ID. So that's what that is going to represent. Okay, let's look at price cents first, and then we come back to platform fee cents. And price cents is the price of the product or service in cents, or the lowest common denomination of the currency that we're using. So what I'm going to do for price cents is, in this case, I'm simply going to reference the pop-up input. So maybe just go back to that. We look for all our services, and we go to mobile app development. I'm simply going to reference this here. So you can see here that's going to be input pop-up budgets value. But what you could do is, if the price for the service was saved down to a database, and you might remember under services we actually have the price per hour saved here, 80. If you wanted to reference that instead, what you could do is say current page's service price per hour. I'm not going to do that in this case just because it's not the way this app is laid out. But one key thing I want to mention is, you might remember that I said Stripe always deals in the lowest denomination of currency. And you can see here we're dealing with cents, whereas this value in our pop-up is going to be in dollars. So what I need to do is I need to take this 80 and I need to multiply it by 100 to get 8,000 cents. So I'm going to multiply that by 100, and then we have that. Platform fee. So this is going to be how much your application, your platform takes of each sale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the exact same thing as what I have below. In fact, I'm actually just going to copy the expression. I'm going to paste it in here. But let's say we want your platform to take 20% of each sale. What you can do is you can say multiplied by 0.2. So you're now going to take 20%. Or what you could do is sometimes it can be nice to have a kind of centralized place where you're referencing this rate instead of if you have, multiple of these actions in your app. What you could do is in data, in option sets, you could say new option set, platform fee, create that, and just say commission, and we're going to create a new attribute. It's going to be cut, and it's going to be a number, and let's put in 0.2, save that, and then back in our workflow, instead of typing in manually 0.2, we could get rid of that, and we could say get an option, platform fee, commission, it's cut, and that's going to get you exactly the same thing. Just be aware that people can access all option set values, so if this is sensitive, which it probably isn't, you don't want to put in an option set. You should always assume that everything you put in option sets is visible to everybody if they want to find out what it is. Okay, quantity is the number of the service you are selling. We're going to stick that to 1. Currency, really important. You must put in a 3-digit ISO code. You can see a full list of supported currencies at this link. And then for product name, we're going to put in current page services name. So that's the name of the service. I'm going to come on to these fields in a second. They are all relevant, but for now, let's make a few changes to our transaction. So you might remember in step 1, we created a transaction. In step 2, we're creating a checkout session. What we're going to do now is we're actually just going to make changes to the transaction we created in step 1. Let's add in all fields. For the amount in cents, what we can do is we can do the exact same thing that we did for the price cents field here. In fact, I'm going to copy that. Or what we can do is we can just reference the result of step 2 and get its amount. So this is actually returning some values that we can then reference in step 3. We can also reference the checkout session ID. You'll see here that is, again, as a result of step 2. So we'll do that. The seller ID, we can get that from the current page's services, freelancers, seller account ID. And then status and payment intent ID, we're actually not going to be able to get these at this stage, but I'm going to show you in a minute how you can reference them later. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to get rid of that. And then finally, in step 4, we're going to go to navigation, open an external website, and we're going to use the result of step 2, which is this one here, its URL. So let's try that out. I think everything here looks pretty good. And try and hire our freelancer here. So hire me, Bubble app development. Let's say a budget again of $800, and let's just say marketplace app. And we're going to go to submit proposal. You can see here something's happening in the background, and sure enough, we're brought to this Stripe checkout session. And I'm going to fill in these details here really quickly. Just before I click pay here, we're obviously still in test mode, and just for your own reference, this is one of the Stripe test card values, 4242, etc., etc. You can use any date in the future and any 3 digits for this field here. So I'm going to click on pay. I do think we're probably going to get an error, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. Yeah, okay, so we cannot create a destination charge for connected accounts in the US, and you might remember we registered our seller here as being in the US. We can't do that because the connected account is outside the platform's region. So I'm actually using an Irish platform and our seller is in the US. And this means that we can't process a destination charge with our current settings. Now, you may see they also have this note here. You may use the on behalf of parameter to have the charge settled in the connected accounts country. And please see this link for more details. And I didn't go through it a second ago, but you will notice on this create checkout session action, there is actually this field here that says on behalf of. This is a pretty important field, and I've just changed it from no to yes. And what I've done by changing it from no to yes is I basically said instead of having the customer transact with my platform, and you can see here it looks as though they're transacting with my qualified platform rather than with the seller themselves. But when I set this to yes, then the seller, the merchant, is going to be the business of record for the payment. They're not going to be transacting directly with my platform, qualified. They're going to be transacting with the seller, which is this one, which is, Alex Albon here, and his business. Now, I do recommend reading the full documentation, but a nice benefit of setting this to yes is you don't have this issue where if your merchant, your seller, is in a different region to your platform, then you can't process transactions. If you set this to yes, that's no longer an issue. So I'm actually just going to reprocess that payment. So let's go back to our freelancer we want to hire, Alex Albon. Hire him again. Okay, and let's click submit proposal. I realize we're saying submit proposal when we're actually going through the payment, but we'll come on to that. And again, I'm going to fill out these details quickly. But before I do, you can see here, it looks now as though we're interacting not with qualified, but with Alex Albon. And you can see here, by confirming your payment, you allow Alex Albon to charge you for this payment. So that's what setting the on behalf parameter to yes does. Now it's the seller we're transacting with rather than the platform itself. Just to be clear, this doesn't change how the fee is split. We're still going to get 20% going to the platform, but I think it's just an important thing to go through. So I'm going to fill out these details again really quickly. Okay, and now I'm going to click pay. That went through successfully. And if we go into our Stripe dashboard, and first of all, let's go to transactions. So you can see here we had a $800 payment that went through. And if we click on the collected fees tab up here, you can see $160 of that, which is 20%, went to our platform. So this is how you split payments. 160 is going to go to qualify the platform, with the remainder going to our Alex Albon connected account. And if we look at him, you can see here we should have a payment going through. So you can see your total balance is $640, and you can see $0 is available to pay out, which is an important consideration, and we'll come on to that. But yeah, that's how you split payments effectively between a seller and a platform. You can see here we have splitting payments between the platform and the merchant. We created a checkout session. We went through the on behalf of parameter. Maybe let's quickly go through embedding checkout sessions before we move on to putting a payment on hold until the job is accepted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new page in my Bubble application. I'm going to call it payment page, and I'm just going to copy it from something that's easy to modify. Let's go with the terms and conditions page. I'm just going to delete all this and all this. And then what I'm going to do is, because I've installed the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin, I do have access to this embedded checkout session element here. So I'm going to drag that, I'm going to drop it into my page, I'm going to let it take up the full width, and I'm going to let it take up the full height. But we'll set a minimum of, let's say, 600, see how that looks. And what I'm going to do is, when someone creates a checkout session, they are going to, instead of being brought to an external Stripe hosted page, we're actually going to host a checkout session within our application. And in order for us to load the checkout session, what we're going to do is we're going to say on the page itself, we're going to set the type of content to be transaction. And then we're going to say when the page is loaded, we're going to use this action here under element actions, and it's going to be load embedded checkout session. And we need to get the client secret here. Now, this is actually a pretty sensitive piece of information. I don't recommend saving it down in your database, but we can access it directly from the Stripe API. So what we're going to do is we're going to say get data from an external API. We're going to say we want to retrieve checkout session details. The checkout session is going to be equal to the current page transactions checkout session ID. And then what we're going to get is the client secret. Okay, so now the trick is when we're actually creating the checkout session on our service page, which is here, instead of opening an external website, we're going to get rid of that. and we're going to say we're going to navigate to a page. We're going to go to the payment page, and we're going to send the transaction that we created in step 1 to that page. We also need to make one more change, and that's going to be here under the Stripe Connect checkout session action. If you scroll way down, you'll see here we have the option to embed session. And if we want to embed a session in our application, we're going to change that to yes. So let's hire Alex Albon one more time and then just see how this looks. So let's just find him here. I'm sure there's a better way to organize that, but just given the app we have. Okay, go to hire me. Let's go with $1,000 this time. And this time when we click on submit proposal, you can see something's happening in the background, but instead of being brought to a Stripe page, we're actually brought to this page in our application. Now, you can see the embedded checkout session is not loading, so there's something going on here. So let's have a look at what we have. And one thing I like to do if I have an error like this is I want to go to debug mode, which I'm going to get by just putting in debug underscore mode equals true in the address bar. And then I'm going to go step by step. And even before I run step by step, I can see I have an issue here. So let's take a look at this. Okay. The service Stripe Connect retrieve checkout session details has an issue. So it's our retrieve checkout session details call that is having the problem. So let's take a look at this. Okay, that looks okay to me. So I wonder what is going wrong there. One thing we can do is we can clear errors. We can run the page in step by step. And then when we refresh, what we're going to see is that, okay, this is the action that's happening on page load. We're loading the embedded checkout session, but something is going wrong there. And this is actually a good opportunity to use our Stripe logs to debug the issue, because we haven't come across an error yet, but I can promise you if you're integrating Stripe with Bubble, you're going to come across some issue at some stage. And fortunately, Stripe makes it pretty easy usually to debug these issues. And what you can do is you can go to your Stripe dashboard, go to developers, and then under logs, this is a list of all the different API calls we've made to Stripe, and essentially the plugin is making all these calls. And you can see for our most recent one, we passed in an invalid empty parameter here. And you know, the ones in errors, they have the 400 ERR code next to them. And this is really where you get the detail on what went wrong. So let's take a look at this. You pass an empty string for return URL. Okay, now this means that we didn't provide a return URL when you were creating the checkout session. And back on my service page where I was creating that checkout session, I'm just realizing now we embedded the checkout session by setting this to yes, but if we do that, the return URL is mandatory. So, you know, if you're using the Stripe externally hosted payment form, you put in the success URL, the cancel URL. If you're embedding the checkout session, you have to provide the return URL. So I'm just going to copy this one here that I've used for success URL, paste it in here, and let's try and do that again. And let's just do run normal. We can leave debug mode on. Let's hire Alex Albon one more time. He's getting a lot of business from us. And we've now submitted that. And you can see now, yeah, that our payment form is loading up inside in our application itself. We can fill out these details just like we did on the Stripe hosted page, and then we can be brought to the return URL afterwards. So that's how you embed checkout session inside your application. Okay, let's move on to putting a hold on payment until the job is accepted, because we may not want our payment to go through until, you know, at least the freelancer has accepted the job, never mind actually, you know, finishing the task, which we'll come on to here. So what I want to build in now is a change to our payment flow where we do hire the freelancer, but at the same time, we're not actually going to see the money leave our customer's account until the freelancer accepts the job. And what I'm going to do that is just make one really simple change to our Stripe Connect create checkout session action. And that's to set this authorize only field to yes. So what this does is it changes the char so that it is authorized but not captured. And what that means is that Stripe is going to take our payment details, much like we have up until now, but the money isn't actually going to leave our account. So let's create another transaction now. Let's go back to our homepage, and we can hire another freelancer this time. So let's go to popular services. Let's go to graphic design, and let's get some logo design from Wayne. And let's hire Wayne for $400. And this is going to bring us to our embedded checkout session page. I'm going to put these details in really quickly. Okay, and we should now see this $400 transaction come through on our Stripe dashboard, but it's going to look a bit different to the other ones. Let's just give it a second here to go through. And actually just refresh, see if that speeds things up. Yeah, and you can see here, whereas most of the other transactions were marked as succeeded, this one is uncaptured. So what that means is that the funds haven't actually left or been captured from our customer's credit card just yet. They're authorized, but they're not yet captured. And I think this is actually useful for a marketplace like Fiverr, Upwork, where there's obviously a gap between when the service is agreed upon and when the initial kind of payment authorization is made, but then until the freelancer accepts the job, and then later when the service is delivered. So what we can do to then capture the funds is we can have the freelancer accept the job, and then they will get the funds. So I'm just trying to remember, I think we had Wayne Hamilton was our freelancer. Let's log in as him and see what we can do. And I'm just conscious, actually, we haven't really dealt with this jobs data type at the moment, because if we log in as Wayne and go to his dashboard, and look at his jobs, it actually doesn't look as though he's been hired for any jobs yet, even though he has. And the reason is we haven't dealt properly with the jobs data type. So when we're creating our checkout session here, before we do that, we actually need to create a new thing. And that new thing is going to be a job. Let's just add all the fields here. And okay, this looks like a lot, but it's actually not that much more work. The cost and cents, quite simple. It's going to be equal to our input pop-up budgets value. Customer is going to be current user's customer ID, or I should have said the current user even. Description is going to be equals to input pop-up descriptions value. That was just what the kind of information on the job was. Freelancer is going to be current page services freelancer. The name is going to be input pop-ups name. Review, not relevant for now. Status, I'll come back to that in a second. Submitted work, not relevant for now. And then transaction is going to be equal to the result of step 1. But then status. Okay, so this is kind of important because we want the freelancer to be able to do different things based on what stage the job is at. At this stage, the job has only been submitted. It hasn't been accepted by the freelancer. And if we go into our database and go to option sets, I've created 4 different statuses here for the job. We have awaiting confirmation, in progress, complete, and delivered. And it's going to start off by awaiting confirmation. So a customer creates a job, it has not been accepted by the freelancer, it is awaiting confirmation. So what we can do is we can set here, get an option. Option set is going to be job status. The option is going to be awaiting confirmation, and it's display. Okay, so let's hire a freelancer again, and we will see what they can do. So let's log out, and let's log in as that customer again. That customer was, who do we have here? Jasmine Dart is our customer. And let's just hire Alex Albon again, just keep things simple because he won't have any other jobs at the moment. Hire him for bubble app development. So a new app development. Let's do $500 this time, and we'll just call it test. submit that proposal, we're brought to our embedded checkout session page. We'll fill in these details really quickly. Let's click on pay, and again, we will see in our Stripe dashboard that that transaction has been authorized but not yet captured. So you can see there's another uncaptured one. But now we will see that that is our dashboard. Let me just log out for a second, and then we're going to log back in as Alex Albon. And then in his dashboard, he now has the option under jobs. So this is the first job that he's been hired for. He now has the option, once he's looked at this and said, okay, that looks all right, he can now accept this job. And when he accepts this job, what we want to happen is we want to capture the payment. We want to move the funds from our customer's credit card, debit card, whatever, into Stripe. And if we just take a look at the workflow behind this accept job button, let's go to jobs. So the workflow here, job actions, and where is this? So a lot of things hidden here at the moment. Okay, accept job, this is the one. And what's happening here is we're using this Stripe Connect capture payment. So this is actually going to capture the payment that's associated with a particular job. And then we're just updating the transaction, changing the status, and making changes to the job as well. I'm going to recreate this workflow because it's not as simple as it looks. There's actually one more thing we need to do first. So if we go to, let's in fact just find it this way, Stripe Connect, capture payment. Okay, we need to provide two things, the payment intent ID and the amount to capture. Now, we want to capture all of it. So what we're simply going to do is going to go to parent groups jobs, cost and cents, and then we're going to leave it like that. But the payment intent ID is a bit trickier because we don't actually have that yet. And we can get it in a couple of ways. One way we could get it is by going to get data from an external API. We could go to get checkout session details. We could use parent groups jobs and then the transaction associated with it, its checkout session ID. So again, this is where we get into the job and the transaction being linked. And then we could get the payment intent. So that would work, but you may also want to save down the payment intent to your database. So what I actually would prefer to do is get rid of that and put in parent groups jobs, transactions, payment intent ID. But the issue with that is if we look at jobs in our database, we'll see here the most recent one, that's jobs, but transactions itself doesn't have any payment intent ID here. So how do we get the payment intent ID? One way we can do it is we can use the return URL. So you might remember when we were creating our checkout session on the service page, we were navigating the user to the dashboard, and we were navigating them to the dashboard, but also having the success equals true parameter in the workflow, or sorry, in the URL. What that means is if we go to our dashboard page, what we could do is we could use that information to run an action on page load and get the data we need. So you'll see here we have at the moment this event that's running on page load for dashboard. It's only being run when there's something called transaction in the page URL and it's not empty. And what we're doing then is we're searching for the transactions, and I think it's probably easier to recreate this from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this event. I'm going to go back to my service, or I'm going to go back to, service there. I want to add in another thing to my return URL. So we have success equals true, but I also want to add in another URL parameter. So I'm going to say and transaction equals the result of step one, the transaction I'm creating here, its unique ID. So now when we get navigated to the home dashboard page, we're going to have two URL parameters, success equals true and transaction equals whatever the unique ID of the transaction is. And we can use that information to make a change to a transaction. So what we're going to do is we're going to say when page is loaded, but only when get data from page URL transaction is not empty. We're going to make changes to a transaction, and we're going to find the transaction by do a search for transaction. We're going to get the first item where the unique ID is equal to get data from page URL, it's transaction. Have to spell that correctly. So, okay, what's going on here? We're basically looking up the unique ID that's going to be in our page URL. We're matching that with a transaction in our database. And then we're saying payment intent ID equals get data from an external API, retrieve checkout session details, and use this transaction's checkout session ID to get, and you can get a load of data here, but let's go with the payment intent. Okay, bit of work in that, but it's going to make it really simple in a minute when we want to capture the payment. So I'm going to log out. I need to refresh my page first. Let's log out. Let's log back in as a customer. Let's find Alex again and hire him. Sorry for $1,000 this time. Submit that proposal, provide our payment details in the embedded checkout session page. Okay, let's click pay, and I want you to watch what's going to happen in the page URL here. So you can see here we have two URL parameters. We have success equals true, and then we also have transaction equals this number here. And if we look at this number, it goes 1738. If we look at our database, what we'll see is that the most recent transaction is also 1738. And we see the payment intent is getting populated here. And the way that's working is if we add debug mode equals true to the end of this, and if we then run it in step by step and reload our page, what we'll see is that we are running this action because transaction is in the page URL. And we made changes to the thing. All the other stuff is kind of irrelevant, but that's what was happening there. Because we had transaction in the page URL, we made changes to the transaction. Okay, I can see there is an issue here with the cost. That is way too low, and I think that's because when we're creating a job, we forgot to multiply it by 100. Let's take a quick look at that under service. Yeah, cost and cents, forgot to multiply that by 100. That makes sense. Okay, let's just take a look at our Stripe dashboard. There should be one more payment gone through for $1,000. Yeah, and what we can do now is if Alex Alban decides to capture this, let me just run that. I'm sorry, we need to actually log in as Alex Alban, of course, so let's do that. So if he decides to accept this job, which is actually for 1,000, not 10, we're going to capture that payment. If we look at our Stripe dashboard now, you see this $1,000 payment. We should see that change from uncaptured to partially reversed, which isn't what we want, but I understand what's going on here. And it was just in relation to that jobs data type we had. You might remember we forgot to multiply it by 100 initially, which means that in our database, the last job which we were managing, the cost was 1,000 cents, which is only $10. And because when you capture $10 of the $100 payment, or sorry, $10 of the $1,000 payments, I should say, that means that the rest of it was reversed, as in it wasn't actually charged. So $10 out of 1,000 were captured, 990 were reversed, which is not obviously what we intended. But now that we fixed that issue with the jobs cost not being multiplied by 100, I'm just going to try it again. And this time I'm hoping we see this go from uncaptured to succeeded. So let's just log out, log in as a customer again, find our customer, Jasmine Dart. Once again, we'll purchase from Alex, and we'll again fill out the details here really quickly. Just to stop here for a second, I'm just going to turn off debug mode, because I mentioned sometimes that can have an impact with the return URL if you have page URL parameters in it, like we do. So again, just going to fill out these details quickly. Okay, let's pay for that. We should see that $500 transaction come through in our Stripe dashboard. Let's take a look. Transactions, and let's just refresh our Stripe dashboard. Okay, so that's there as uncaptured. But now if I instead log in as the Alex Albon test account, we should be able to accept that job in our dashboard. And this time I'm hoping we see that change from uncaptured to captured. So let's accept this $500 job. Click on accept. You can see some work is going on there in the background. And now if we look at that charge and we refresh our Stripe dashboard, you'll see now that that charge has been accepted, or it succeeded, I should say. And if we go collected fees, we should see a portion of that gone to the platform, and you can see $100 is gone to the platform. So the money has moved from Jasmine Dart, the customer, their credit card, to our platform, and then the platform has also sent the freelancer's amount to their account. Now, the freelancer doesn't actually yet have access to those funds. They're staying in its Stripe account. They're not being paid out to the freelancer's bank account just yet, but we're going to come on to that. Before I do, there's two small things I just want to tidy up. The first thing was, you may remember for our transaction data type, we have this field here, status, and this can be useful when we're trying to figure out whether a charge has been authorized, captured, gone through, or whatever it may be. So I just want to change that now, and we're actually going to do this on the same place as to where we updated the payment intent ID. You might remember if we go to the dashboard page, we had a on-page load transaction action here. So we're going to make changes to the transaction, and we can actually just add one more step in and say make changes to a thing, and we're just going to make a change to the transaction in step one. And what we're going to do is, for the status, we're going to say get data from an external API, get payment details. The payment intent is going to be this transaction's payment intent ID, and this is why we're doing it in two separate steps, because we actually need to get the payment intent ID before we can use it for this step here. And in fact, what I might actually do is do the result of step one, its transaction, its payment intent ID, just to make sure it waits for it. And then we can get status here. Let's refresh. And then the other thing I wanted to do was, you might remember we clicked accept job there, but the status is still awaiting confirmation, which obviously isn't the case. It hasn't been confirmed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my jobs page here, and then under job actions, when the job is accepted, we're obviously capturing the payment, but I also want to update the status at this stage of the payment and also of the job itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make changes to the transaction here, and this is going to be equal to parent groups jobs transaction. This is where it becomes really handy if you've linked the job and the transaction together, because you can now access it. And what we're going to say is status is equal to, again, get data from an external API, get payment details, payment intent is going to be this transaction's payment intent ID, and status is going to be status. So then we've updated the transaction. Now we're just going to update the job. So I'm going to say make changes to a thing, and it's going to be parent group's job, and we're simply going to change the status here to, we have our option set, so I can say get an option, and we have job status. This time we're going to change it to in progress, because the job has now been accepted. The freelancer is working on it. So I think that's a fair enough status to give the job. So let's do one more test purchase as our customer, and then we can move on to actually releasing funds from the freelancer's account into their bank account. So log back in as our customer. Let's search for Alex Albon again. Let's do a $2,000 job this time. And again, I'm going to fast forward through this. App didn't log in as our customer. So now I'm going to fast forward through this. Okay, so we paid for that $2,000 job, and hopefully now those workflows are going to run based on that unique ID for the transaction in the page URL. And if I go back here and I take a look at transactions, yeah, you can see for the most recent transaction, we now have requires capture as the status. So this is when the transaction has been authorized, but not yet captured. So I'm going to log in as my freelancer now, and he's going to accept this job, and hopefully this time the status is going to change. And in addition to that, the status of the transaction will also change. So just watch this status here, click on accept job. Okay, he's accepted it. The status has now been changed to in progress. The new option here, which again I'm controlling by a conditional, is he can now mark it as delivered, which he won't do just yet because he just started. But then if I look at the transaction in my database, you'll see that this has now been updated to succeeded. It was requires capture, but now it has gone through successfully. So that's how we put a hold on payments. Let me just go back to my checklist until the job is accepted. We've authorized the payment, and then we've captured it once the freelancer accepts the job. The funds have moved from the customer's credit card to our platform Stripe account and the freelancer's Stripe account. And what I might do is just actually go back to my profile here for our freelancer, take a look at the Stripe Express dashboard, because I just want to show you the difference between funds that are available to pay out and funds that are kind of sitting there at the moment. Okay, so this is the freelancer's account, and from all the test transaction we've done, he's racked up a nice $3,440, but not all of it is available to pay out. And the reason for this is just because funds move into the freelancers, or your merchants, I should say, Stripe account, that doesn't mean they can access it straight away. Just click on see details here. Yeah, so some of the transactions are still accumulating, and it's important to note that especially when you set up a Stripe account for the first time, or you're using a Stripe account for the first time, be it your platform account or the seller/merchant's account, the funds won't always be available straight away. And that's because Stripe will run some checks just to make sure everything is okay, and there's often a lag at the start, especially between when funds are moved to their account and when they actually become available. There's some good Stripe documentation on that I do recommend you read if you get a chance. But let's, in this scenario, assume that the freelancer has completed the job to the satisfaction of the customer, and we're ready to give him his payout essentially. So what we can do is, let's just go back. Okay, now let's assume that our freelancer has delivered the job as requested, and let's say he sends the completed work to Jasmine via message here. What we're going to do then is he's going to mark this job as delivered. And what's going to happen when he clicks this, it's quite simple. I think this is the workflow here. Yeah, the status is just going to change from in progress to delivered. So let's just say he marks it as delivered. Nothing is happening yet, but this will then trigger Jasmine to go, okay, he has now delivered the work. Let me go and review it. So I'm going to log out, and we'll log in as Jasmine again. And now in her dashboard, she has the option to mark it as complete. So again, let's assume that he sent a message to her with a link to the completed work, and she has now reviewed it and she's happy with it, and she's going to click on mark as complete. What's happening when she clicks on mark as complete? Well, that's where the funds get released, or at least they attempt to be released to the freelancer's bank account. So let's go to job actions, and then it's actually going to show a pop-up first. So what we're going to say is once you mark the job as complete, it will be considered finished. And then what's going to happen then is mark job as complete. We're going to make changes to the job. The status is going to be changed to display, but then we're going to make this manual payout. I'm going to come on to this condition in a second, but let me just clear that for now. And I'm actually just going to delete this workflow as well afterwards. But what we're doing here is we're making a manual payout that's going to cause the funds from the freelancer's Stripe account to be released into their bank account. So it effectively gives them control over the funds. And you can see here the account is going to be equal to the parent group's jobs freelancer's seller account. So again, just accessing the freelancer's Stripe account ID. And then the amount is going to be equal to, and this is important, it's going to be equal to the cost of the job overall multiplied by 100, but then also multiplied by 0.8. Because remember, we're keeping the 20% less any fees for our platform, but the 80%, the remaining 80%, is going to be released to the freelancer. So I'm going to click on that button. I'm going to assume that we're happy with the job. So we're going to say mark is complete, and that's clicked. And we're getting an error. And the error we're getting here, you can see it's not particularly well constructed, but it says you have insufficient funds in your Stripe account for this transfer. Your card balance is too low. So let's go back to our freelancer's account. Let's go to connected accounts. And this is his account here. So again, the issue is we were trying to transfer 80% of that job, but we actually have nothing that's available to pay out at the moment. And I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but sometimes there's just a bit of a gap between when Stripe will actually accept funds and have them in the connected account and when they're actually available to pay out. Now, if you're running a services marketplace, it's probably going to take a few days to deliver anyway, in which case you are going to be able to more than likely be able to release it first time. But we obviously have to account for the possibility that maybe you won't. So what we're going to do is we're going to build in some logic to, first of all, check if there's sufficient funds that are available to pay out. And we're going to add the logic to the only when section of the Stripe Connect manual payout action. And what we're going to say is we're only going to make this payout when there's a sufficient balance in the freelancer Stripe account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say we're only going to make this payout when get data from an external API, Stripe Connect retrieve connected account balance, which is going to be the freelancer's Stripe account. We're going to pass through the freelancer's Stripe account ID. So we're going to go for freelancer seller account ID. And then we're going to get available, which is the funds that are available for payout. And we're going to get the first item. Sometimes you can have multiple balances. So available first item is what you want there. Get the amount. And we're only going to do that when the amount available is equal to or greater than parent group's jobs, cost and cents. And then remember, we only need 80% of it. So ideally, we would just say, multiplied by 0.8, but this isn't unfortunately easy to do in the Bubble expression editor. So instead, what we can do is we can put in here arbitrary text and put in parent group's jobs, cost and cents, multiplied by 0.8 for 80%, which is how much the freelancer is entitled to. We'll then get an error because this evaluates to a text, but we can simply use the very handy converted to number operator to make that work. Okay, so now we're only going to pay out if there's a sufficient amount there, and then we will test this out. And I've actually just realized I kind of checked this in the background just to understand what was going on. And in that time, funds have actually become available to pay out. So I'm expecting this workflow to actually go through. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it in step-by-step mode, just so you can see the logic. So if we mark, we're logged in as a customer, if we mark this job as complete, you can see here, first of all, we're going to be shown pop-up, and then we're going to mark as complete. Running that, we're changing the job status to complete. We're making the manual payout because the amount available is greater than the $320. I think that user has $14.40 available. So we're then going to make that payout, hide the pop-up, the job is marked as complete, and the customer can now leave a review. And if we see how this looks in our Stripe dashboard, we just refresh this, And they'll be able to say this in their Stripe Express dashboard as well. But just because we have it open here, let's take a look. Yep, so you can see they had 1440. They now have 1120 because we paid out that $320. So that's how you make a manual payout. One last thing we want to do is we've obviously put in the logic so that this is only run if there's a sufficient balance. But what if there isn't a sufficient balance? What do you do then? Well, there's a number of things you can do. A really kind of simplistic one is to simply try again after a week. So what I've done in this example is I've created a backend workflow, and you will need to be on a paid bubble plan to use backend workflows, but I've simply created an event called schedule manual payout. I've passed through the necessary parameters, seller account ID, amount and cents and currency, and then I'm making the payout. So what I can do is I can add an action here for schedule API workflow. I only have one, and I'm going to schedule for the current date and time, but add in 7 days. And then the things we want to pass through are pretty straightforward. We want to pass through the jobs, freelancers, seller account ID. We want to pass through the jobs, cost in cents multiplied by 0.8, because again, remember the freelancer is only getting 80%, and then our platform is getting the remaining 20% minus any fees. And then the currency, I'm just going to hardcode this in as USD, but we need to think about the logic here. We basically want the reverse of this. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste this in, and I'm going to say if the connected account balance available is less than what is necessary, then this is going to be scheduled. And maybe just an example, what I could do is I could just change that last job, even though it's complete. Let me just put it in as delivered. I'm spelling that wrong. Just so our customer can kind of reauthorize it. So yeah, you can see their market's complete. And let's just assume that we want to pay out a very high amount. So let me see. They have currently 3,440. So if we put in, say, 4,500 and then add another 1.2 for the cents, that should be too much. So let's, and in fact, we're actually going to need to put that in the job itself. Yeah. So again, this is just kind of a very manual example of what's required. Save that down. And that should be sufficient. And we just check. Paying out that much, we pasted that in. And we're going to run this when the opposite is true. Let's just put in here instead that amount. And let's just put in here that amount. Okay, let's try this. See how we get on. And then let's mark as complete, doing it step by step. So we're changing the job to complete. We're not making the manual payout this time because the amount available is not sufficient to cover this. We're trying to pay out 4,500. There's only 1,120 available. But we can't schedule an API workflow over a week's time when hopefully the funds will become available by then. We can even see that in our server logs. If we go to logs, go to scheduler, and look at all the future ones. You can see there's a separate one I tried as well yesterday, but this is the one here that we're going to try again in a week's time. So you could also add a recursive thing in there where it keeps trying until the funds become available. You can send the kind of notification email to the freelancer to let them know, look, you completed a job, you will get your funds once they're available, and that's how you can deal with that. So hope this video has been useful. That's all I wanted to cover. If you do have any questions, you can let me know in the comment section below.